I have a very special guest that's going to be joining me today. He is one of the most renowned boxing commentators with Sky Sports. He also is a ring pundit and also the author of The Knockout, Andy Clarke. Andy, how you doing today?
Yeah, I'm very good. Thanks for having me. It's a great setup
Absolutely.
you've got, I have to say.
Appreciate it. You as well. Well, obviously, when you talk about boxing in America, boxing UK, boxing fans go and watch boxing regardless of where it's taking place at. But I want to have you on here because there's a lot of stuff going on over across the pond right now, and you know it better than anybody else over there. So I really want to just kind of dive into a few things. And right out the gate, though, there was a massive controversy that came out this past weekend in a fight that I'm still a little bit shocked about what went down. That's in revolving the David Adeleye versus TKV fight there. And so obviously, I think everyone's seen the play now, what's gone down with the ref saying pause and everything that's going down gets knocked down. Can you kind of walk us through a little bit, just your thoughts? Have you seen something too similar to that before? How often is that? How do you think that should be handled? Just kind of break down that for yourself.
I haven't seen it too many times before, that exact kind of incident, but you do see similar kinds of things where somebody gets hit after the call to break, or somebody gets hit after the bell has gone, and often referees, I think, are quite reluctant to take a particularly strong line on it because nobody wants to disqualify anybody. I'm not saying that Adelaide should have been disqualified. Just in that
Sure.
instance, you'd imagine what you would do is you certainly wouldn't count it as a legitimate knockdown, and then you would give TKV 5 minutes to recover in the same way that you would if somebody got hit low. And
hmm
even then, that's not ideal if somebody's really been hit hard and had something taken out of them. So you see kind of similar things. Funnily enough, on the same night, two fights beforehand, in a fight between Jack Rafferty and
Yeah.
Corey O'Regan, we had a similar sort of incident where
hmm
the glove was pulled down by the referee, the instruction to break was given, and then O'Regan got hit. And I'm never a fan of referees physically touching fighters unless they've called break and they're getting in there to just really get amongst them and
Sure.
separate them. Pulling a glove down, pulling an arm down, as soon as a fighter sees it or feels it, then they
hmm
will relax because they'll feel confident that they know what the next thing is going to be, and that will be the call to break. So that often is two things really. It's not just the fact that he's been hit; it's the fact that he's been hit when he switched off
Yeah.
and turned off those kind of brace mechanisms because he thinks that we're no longer in active contest, if you like. Because the punch he got hit with was a decent shot, but if he'd been braced and ready, it,
Exactly.
it
Yeah.
wouldn't have done anything like the damage that it did. So it was a it was it was a bit of a mess, to be honest. And I know that the border control here are looking at it tomorrow. They're meeting
Yep.
tomorrow and having a look at it, and they'll decide what they're going to do. But it was a very unfortunate conclusion to a British heavyweight title fight. But as with all mistakes, the key thing now is what's the response, because
Exactly.
mistakes happen and we all accept that.
hmm
Um, but how you handle it now is the key thing, really.
And that's what I want to follow up with you on because that is something I know the ring posted about yesterday. That's going to be a Wednesday. They're going to have a meeting and whatnot. And I know there's a lot of controversy. People say, will the BBFC actually go out and make it a no contest? Historically, that's not always what they like to do. But is that something, in your opinion, that you see possibly happening? Could this be where they make it a no contest, an immediate rematch, something along those lines? Or what do you think the results could possibly be from that meeting?
I think they'll probably say that the result stands, but they'll order an immediate rematch.
hmm
That's just what I think they will probably do, because they put a lot of faith and trust in their referees, the British Boxing Board of Control. They'll see that a mistake has been made here. But one thing they don't allow in this country is video replay. They don't allow that facility. It is all at the discretion of the referee, and the referee's decision is final. And I think for that reason, they will say, okay, it was a mistake, but that is the decision that he made, and the result stands. But we will order an immediate rematch. I think that's what we'll get.
So, in your own opinion, let's say you had all the rule books, you could create whatever you wanted there. Is replay something that you would be in favor of? Is that something I know obviously can cause more time? Sometimes fans are kind of polar opposite on those stances on that. But for your own sake, is that something that you would be interested in? Would you like to possibly see them adapt that?
Yeah, I would, because I think the system that the WBC have, basically, where they're keen to have video replay available to the referee for purely for black and white decisions. Was it low or wasn't it?
Yep.
Was the cut caused by a punch or a head clash? Was it after the bell or wasn't it? And in this case, was he hit after the call to break or wasn't he? these are yes and no things, and mistakes get made because people don't quite have the right angle to see something, or the referee makes a kind of chronological misjudgment, if you like. And you can watch the replay and you can clearly decide, okay, well, this needs to be overturned because we can clearly see it's not an interpretation or a matter of opinion. It's just a cold, hard fact that he was hit after the call to break. And in that instance, you would change it. We had one here a few years ago. Charlie Edwards was boxing Julio Cesar Martinez and got put down by a body shot. And Martinez then hit him when he was down on all fours so late that the referee had turned around to get to the neutral corner and pick up the count from the timekeeper and all of that. So he didn't actually see it. He was turning as he hit him with the late and very illegal blow. Everybody else saw it, but he didn't. And he gave the decision and he counted him out. And there was uproar at ringside. And there was a WBC title fight defense, and Rich O'Sullivan was there. And he actually just used the big screen as his own personal replay and had it announced at the end of the fight that it was a no contest, basically, which is not something you would ever get in a UK ring normally. But for stuff like that, yeah, I'm in favour of it because I don't see that it really takes all that much time.
Definitely. So I also want to touch up on something that we know is a massive fight coming out to your side over there. And it's obviously a fight over here that we're talking about. We're excited for Chris Eubank Jr., Conor Benn. But the atmosphere obviously is going to be much different over there than it is out here. There's a lot of stuff, animosity and everything building up for many, many years now, going all the way back to their fathers. And so I just have to ask you for the beginning portions there. When you talk about just the overall atmosphere in the boxing world out there, what is it like? What's the vibe like out there currently as people are preparing a few weeks out now from one of the biggest fights, if not the biggest fight to make in British boxing?
I mean, it's building. It's building because we got a couple of good ones coming back to back. Ben Whittaker fights Liam Cameron in a rematch after that crazy first fight they had in Saudi, and there's a lot riding on that. But then Eubank Ben is just a different level when it comes to that grudge match factor because it is real. Obviously, they've got the backstory with the parents, but they've got a relationship, if you like, of their own now. And the backstory will always be fantastic. People will get involved in that. I remember it the first time around. It was one of the things that really just pulled me down the boxing rabbit hole. I was 12, I think, when they first boxed, Nigel Benn and Chris Eubank. And it was absolutely everywhere because the world was different then. It was free-to-air TV, radio, newspapers. That was it. So if you made it onto that, you were, and they did make it onto that, and you stop any bank and they were about. The world has changed, obviously, but this is still a really big fight, and people sporting mainstream get dragged into this. They like it or not during fight week because it will be absolutely everywhere, and they are quite different characters. Eubank Jr. is quite studied in what he says. He's got this ability to be just naturally quite patronising and irritating for his opponents. I mean, it's a useful skill to have. Conor Benn's pretty emotional and bites on it. He just can't help himself. And Eubank with antics with the egg in that first press conference, I was there, and to be honest, none of us really saw it because it was on the far side to us. But that just helped sell the fight better than anything else he could possibly have done. And that's what you get with him as well. Some people aren't crazy about him. I've never had any kind of problem with him. I think he understands TV, he understands the press, he understands that you need to bring more than just an attractive style. You need to sell a fight, and he absolutely does that.
And so we obviously have a question. I know we talk about over here a little bit. I know the world kind of talks about it, but in terms of making potentially the biggest fight in British boxing, I think there only were two options really to look at. AJ and Tyson Fury fighting, Eubank and Ben. You have both options to look at. Let's say both are on the table. Which one do you think would end up being the biggest fight to possibly make out there?
Heavyweights, because they're heavyweights, basically. Fury and Joshua are bona fide huge national stars in the UK, not just as athletes, not just because they're boxers, they're not just sportsmen, they're just stars, basically. And because they're heavyweights as well, as we all know, that division pulls in the casual punters more than any other. So it would be those two, but it's some achievement by Eubank and Benn to be mentioned in the same kind of conversation, given that they're at the lower weights. We know how the sport works in terms of its appeal across the board, and with this as well. I mean, when it first reared its head, it did feel pretty manufactured. Not the kind of beef between the two of them necessarily, although it's definitely grown. They were just too far apart in weight. Eubank was a middleweight. He boxed at super middleweight. Probably, I feel, has always been best at super middleweight because he's got more energy there. Although he's not really he's not bursting out of his skin at 12 stone. And Ben was absolutely a welterweight who moved up to welterweight when he probably still could have made super lightweight earlier in his career. So at that point, you did feel like they're just trying to cash this in a bit because of the surnames, and these two will sell the fight really well. But I mean, how competitive can this really be? Even though Eubank agreed to drag himself down to 157, and when you look at it now, it could be that after the event, we look at it and just think, well, of course, Chris Eubank was too big and stopped Conor Benn. What else was really ever going to happen? Yeah. It could be one of those, but I don't know. Ben is just he's so full of rage and determination that you do really wonder. I'm very kind of, well, I don't know what the right word is, anal probably, when it comes to analysing fights prior to the actual fight. I like to look at what's actually happened in real life rather than potential and this, that, and what might happen. And when you do that, you can only really come up with one winner, which is Eubank. But I do wonder because he's in his mid-30s now, Eubank. He's had a pretty long career. He did get chinned by Liam Smith not that long ago. Okay, he won the rematch, which was really, really good, but it happened. He looked okay in his last fight, but I know it was hard to make 160. Not ludicrously hard, but pretty hard. Sure. Whereas Ben is going to be bursting with energy at that weight, absolutely bursting. But his recent performances over the last 3 years have been pretty underwhelming. So I think you have to come down on the side of Eubank if you're looking at it sensibly. But there's just something in the back of my mind that makes me wonder.
Yeah, it's kind of the same pathway I have on that one. I think, like you said, the biggest thing for Ben, obviously, he was suspended for a little bit. He hasn't been the most active fighter. When we have seen him, like you said, it's been underwhelming to say the least in those performances. But let's say hypothetically, obviously, I think Eubank will be a clear favorite heading into that fight. What would the path of victory be for Ben? What would be the route he has to take to possibly compete and possibly even get the win over Eubank?
I think he has to be aggressive. You can never be too reckless or too gung-ho, but I think he has to take it to Eubank and try and impose his youth, and he does have some serious physicality as well. Eubank, he's never looked huge when you look at him, and I don't think Ben would look at him and feel in any way intimidated by size. And I think he needs to really get on top of him and try and drag him into a hard fight really early on. You don't want to walk onto anything. Like I say, you've got to be ice cold about these things, but he's got to make it as uncomfortable for him as he possibly can, because Eubank is the more experienced fighter, and we don't really know whether Eubank has still got it in him to box in the way that he used to, which was just lights, camera, action, high work rate, high intensity, just bring it, because he used to be able to do that. If he can he still do that now at 35, 36? I don't really know, because he didn't particularly have to do that in the second fight against Liam Smith. He did what he needed to do, and it was a good performance. But Smith left something to be desired that night. So that's the question, really: is what has Eubank got left? And Ben has got to make him answer that question quickly, because he can't let him settle in any way or allow him to try and establish or dictate the pace. He's got to go for it. He's got to go for broke.
I do want to sidetrack real quickly on Conor Benn, because obviously he's a little bit younger. He has some stuff still in the tank. I think obviously there's many more fights to make after this Eubank fight. I think you look back at, I don't know what weight class he's going to settle back at, but hypothetically, let's say he goes back, fights at 146. You have him with obviously Boots. You have all the other guys in the mix there. And I think that division is kind of lacking some star power. Outside of obviously you have Boots right now. Stanionis is going to be fine this weekend. But then you have guys like Mario Barrios, you have Brian Norman, who looked good last weekend, but he could obviously be a guy that becomes that star in that weight class as well. Is that something you see possibly happening after this Eubank fight, him going back down to that weight class, competing against guys like the Boots, going up in that weight class, is kind of making some noise there?
I mean, it could happen. Yeah, it could happen if he puts on a good performance against Eubank, win, lose or draw. Then there's plenty of possibilities for him career wise. It's completely unthinkable for him to defeat to Eubank, but the people around him will know that if it doesn't go according to plan in terms of the results, so long as he looks good and is entertaining, then there is a lot out there that can happen. Because before this, he'd been made mandatory by the WBC, I think, hadn't he, for the welterweight title? Based on what, you could ask that question, but you can ask that question in boxing quite often. Sure. So he is well thought of, because commercially he is appealing, he's attractive, and he can sell a ticket. And if he were to beat Eubank, there is a rematch clause, but if he were to beat Eubank, then he is a major draw for big name fighters. People will want to fight him, and they'll probably have to come here to do it, but they will want to fight him. He might prefer possibly super welter. The last couple of times he's boxed, certainly the last time he boxed, that's where he was. But that might even at that stage have been with a view to the fact that they were confident that this next fight he's got was going to happen. But if he's been around 11 stone for a while, then getting down to 10.5 might be difficult. But the reality is that you go where the best fights are, and he is definitely a prize fighter. And so is Eubank. Eubank's never won a world title but he's made an awful lot of money. And I feel like Ben is cut from similar cloth. He would love to win a world title, I'm sure, but he will go where the biggest prize is. And I think with a good performance, he will be looked upon as being a prize. Getting a fight with him could be a serious prize.
And there's another point too. I know I talked about what's the biggest fight, and obviously you went with the one that I agree with you on, is AJ Fury is the biggest fight to make in British boxing. And that's the question we keep asking. Obviously for AJ, it's at a stage of his career where could he go for another fight to build himself back up and try to make another run? Sure. But I think the biggest, by far the most money he's going to make is with the Fury fight. That makes a lot of sense for both guys. But the problem is right now, Fury is obviously retired, at least according to him at this point. Is that something that you see happening down the line? Do you think Fury still has one more fight in him to go fight AJ if the stage is right, whether it be at Wembley or one of the big stadiums out there?
I do, yeah. I always have. And when he retired, I remember we got the news. It was the day I think we were all in central London for a press conference for the last Crescendo. And I remember at the time just thinking to myself, it's only 3 weeks after he's lost that second fight to Usyk, and it felt like longer because we'd had Christmas and New Year, and I've been away on holiday and stuff like that. But I thought about it and I realised it's only 3 weeks. It's really not very long at all. And I think at that point, I totally believe him when he says at the moment that he doesn't want to box again. Sure. Because people are allowed to change their mind. Exactly, people can be very hardcore, can't they? With athletes, it's like, no, you said you're retired. How dare you come back? Well, if he changes his mind, he changes his mind. And I hope he does, because we've heard him talk in the past about how much he needs boxing in his life for his mental well-being and for that discipline and that regime. And he said to me once before the fight with Chisora, he said, I've come to the realization now that boxing will retire me. I won't retire from boxing, which is quite bleak if you think about it. But at the same time, that's been true for loads of fighters. It's hard to leave it alone. They don't know what to do afterwards. And for that reason, I think he will come back. What is it now? Probably about 10 weeks or so, 11 weeks since he announced that retirement. So it's still fairly fresh. But if you're Joshua, you kind of want him to get on with it, because he's in limbo a bit at the minute, AJ, because if you're in the Joshua business, you're thinking to yourself, we don't really want to go for a rebuild like they did with, say, Jermaine Franklin and Otto Wallin and Hellenius, those fights he had in 2023. I'm not saying that I don't think he would beat that level of fighter, but if it went wrong and he did lose off the back of having lost to Dubois as well, then the shine really does come off that Fury fight then. It would still be big, but I think they need to do it next. And so
Agree.
he's just kind of waiting on Fury, which I think will entertain Tyson Fury as well. I think it'll entertain him that he's conducting the orchestra with this one, because he very much is. It obviously can't happen unless he comes out of retirement.
Yep. And I know the only thing I was looking at too is, obviously I said you could do the rebuilding out option. That doesn't necessarily make the most sense financially for AJ, especially when he's already accomplished what he's accomplished. Like, there's no point he has to go get more stuff to accomplish whatever his resume is already set. But there's another fight, obviously, with an American guy that people have been looking at them fighting for a long time, and Deontay Wilder, who he's going to be fighting in Wichita. I think it's going to be June or something like that, late May, something along those lines. Could you see that being the fight that maybe if Fury doesn't want to fight this year, or maybe not until later this year, maybe even early 2026, that could possibly be the fight that they do look into and possibly even make?
Yeah, it could be. It could be. But what needs to happen is that Wilder in that comeback fight needs to uncork an explosive knockout.
Exactly, yeah.
That absolutely must happen, because that is his drawing point. That's his selling point. And personally, I think his ability to detonate at the highest level, or even at kind of just below that highest level, I think it's gone.
Yeah.
But he should be able to do it still against the guy he's in with for his comeback fight. And he has to. Because if he can do that, then that clip will go around and he'll be able to say that the Bronze Bomber is back and all the rest of it. And you can talk it up.
Yeah.
And then you can do it. Then you can make it. But he absolutely has to provide that in that fight. Watching his last couple and just being around him for those last couple out in Saudi, it was really noticeable how different he was. He was very zen. He was all kind of peace and love. I spoke to him for the book about the business of knocking people out, and he was great. And previously, I wouldn't even have dared ask him, to be honest with you, during fight week, to answer a question which was essentially kind of like, what's it like getting knocked out, or do you have that acceptance now that it could be you? I would never have asked him that. And he was great. He was just like, yeah, of course, you have to have that acceptance, because what you're trying to do to them, they're trying to do to you. And those fights against Fury had changed him, basically.
True.
And that darkness that he used to bring to fight week had gone, which for the rest of his life is a really good thing. But for his boxing career, it was a disaster, because you have to be that mean-spirited, win-at-all-costs person, which is what he was. He talk about body bags and other stuff, wouldn't he? Which would make you cringe. But at the same time, that was the place he would take himself to in fight week. He just wanted to do maximum damage. And then you find yourself talking to him and he's telling you about ayahuasca and all this other stuff, and you're thinking, wow, this is what's happened? What's happened here? And the answer is, as Mickey says to Rocky, you got civilized. Some things have changed, and once that edge is gone, I don't think you can really get it back, unfortunately. But that doesn't mean they can't make that fight. But he does have to, it sounds a bit brutal, but he does have to mercilessly chin this guy he's in with next.
Absolutely.
Or it's a very tough sell.
Definitely. So I want to go back to the card real quickly. I have one more question on that one, and that's when you look at the card. Obviously, the big draw is the main event, Chris Eubank, Conor Benn. But there's some good fights on the undercard. Then you talk about Anthony Yard fighting Lyndon Arthur, Liam Smith, Aaron McKenna, CBS can be out there against Glanton, Vidal Riley versus Chevron Clarke. When you look at the card, is there a fight that stands out to you outside of the main event? Like, is there one that you're really excited for?
I mean, they're all good fights. They are all good fights. Liam Smith, Aaron McKenna could be really interesting, because both McKennas, they have just been bred since they were old enough to hold up their hands. Basically, as soon as they were old enough to hold up their hands were getting wrapped. That's how they've come up, and they love it. And he's been waiting for this McKenna. He was in that Matchroom middleweight kind of prize fighter tournament, but that was going to be spread over a few months, and he won his quarterfinal. He was into the semi-finals. He was supposed to box Kieran Conway, and then the whole thing just kind of fell over, which was a real shame, because it was exactly what he'd been needing, because he'd been struggling to get fights. So, that will be a good fight to watch, because they do bring it, the McKennas. And Liam Smith, I've always thought, is a good fighter to watch as well. But Lyndon Arthur, Anthony Yard, the third fight, and it is 1-1. It's not the trilogy that anyone was necessarily asking for, I don't think. But at the same time, it is quite key now, because Yard has got himself into this situation the last year or so whereby he left Frank Warren, or looked like he had, at exactly the wrong time when the Saudi Connect appeared, and then has watched Joshua Buatsi essentially have two fights that he should have had.
Yeah.
And this fight with Buatsi is no closer. And I think, to be honest with you, the window for that, for now, has kind of passed. It could come back, but the minute there's not an enormous amount of interest in it. But for those two, for those pair, for Arthur and Yard, there's a lot riding on that. There's a lot riding on that. The cruiserweight fight's a good fight as well, though. They've done well with the undercard because, with these big cards, it is carried by the headline. It's that particular pay-per-view sales. And to be honest with you, I think it's good what they've done in terms of trying to fix prices and keep prices down. But I'm kind of the view that it doesn't really make that much difference. If someone wants to buy it, they're going to buy it. And a good supporting cast is always a good thing, and they've definitely got one for this. And Spurs is a great place to watch boxing as well. I've been a couple of times for AJ Usyk and then for Fury Chisora, 60 odd thousand. At one end of the ground is just one long sloping terrace, which is just spectacular.
Now, there is one other big British fight you mentioned too in the beginning that's coming up on Easter Sunday, and that's going to be the Ben Whittaker Liam Cameron rematch. And there seems, we know what happened in the fight, or we don't necessarily know what happened actually, but we know something happened in that ring that led to a whole lot of controversy. And then we now find out just a couple of weeks ago, or a couple of days ago now, that there's also controversy on how many rounds this fight is going to be at now. If it's going to be 12 is what the paperwork supposedly was. They were Ben Whittaker and Ben Shalom were supposedly wanting it at 10. Have you heard anything about that? Is that something that's going to possibly impact the fight to an extent? Are they going to go 12, 10? Like, what are you hearing about that?
I've not heard anything about that, which is interesting because normally I would have been, this week I would expect, I know who's on the card, but this week I would expect to get a kind of official card through from Sky with the order of fights and that kind of thing. And I haven't had one yet. If they signed a contract for 12 rounds, then Cameron is totally within his rights to stick to that. And if he does, then it'll be 12 rounds. Yeah. The only way it's going to come down from 12 rounds to 10 is if they come to an agreement, which will see Cameron paid some money to agree to come down from 12 to 10. That's the only way around this that I can see, because no one's really disputing either side that a contract has been signed for 12 rounds. Yep. So that's a mistake on Boxer's part. I don't know who else you could really, whose door you could put that at other than theirs. But if you're Whittaker, I think he will be looking at this fight and thinking, I don't want in the build up to this fight to be all of a sudden looking like I'm scared of 12 rounds. Okay, I was expecting 10, but this is crucial to my career now. I need to win this fight. I can't be complaining and looking frightened of an extra 2 rounds. This is it. This is all on the line, all in. I must win.
Agreed.
So 12, 10, 15, 20, I don't care. I'm just going to make sure that I win this fight. And I haven't really heard him say a word. So I think that is the attitude that he's taking. And it's the attitude that he has to take, because in the first fight, like you said, the finish was bizarre. I always find it strange when people say, "Oh, he wasn't really injured." You don't know.
Yeah, exactly.
You can't know what another human being is feeling. It's possible that he milked it. It's always possible in that situation that someone did that, but you can't know.
Yep.
And I would always prefer to take a fighter at their word, unless it's incredibly obvious what's going on. And there's just no way that was, because they both clattered onto the apron, and it's perfectly feasible that significant damage was done there. And it was called a draw, and at that point I think the scores were about right. It looked like the fight was turning in Cameron's favour at that stage, but you don't know that Whittaker wouldn't have been capable of getting himself together and turning it back again. And that's why you have to do the second fight. But
agree.
All of these, but there's nowhere to go now for Whittaker, and I think he'll like that. I think this is maybe what he needed, the pressure where people are really questioning him. Because it's amazing how quickly things can turn. Everybody loves you, and then all of a sudden you go from being, the next pay-per-view star to people just say, well, you basically just bottled that and faked an injury. Wow, that's quite the turnaround.
So if you were to give a prediction on that fight as of today, obviously let's assume it's 12 rounds. Who do you have winning that fight?
I think he can do it, Whittaker. I think he's capable of producing the performance that he needs to. He's got a new trainer, which is interesting. He's gone for Andy Lee. I know that he'd been to a few gyms. I think he'd been to see Ben Davison, Shane McGuigan. Andy's based over in Dublin, so that means moving away from the West Midlands for camp. And I think that's a good thing because you have to get out of your comfort zone sometimes. And his godfather, Joby Clayton, after Sugar Hill, that didn't last too long, had been training him and he knows him really, really well and wants nothing but the best for him. But sometimes you can be a bit too close to it. Mm-hmm. Sometimes it can be a little bit difficult if you have that relationship like Joby does to crack the whip and really, really, be mean and tell people things they don't particularly want to hear. Sometimes you need somebody who's able to do that. And Andy Lee's a good trainer. He's quite early in his training career, but you look at what he's done with Joseph Parker. He's got another really good fighter in Paddy Donovan. It will be a serious business him going over there. So I think it was a good choice. And obviously, he's a Kronk fighter back in the day, and he's learned his trade, if you like, from Emmanuel Stewart. Then he was with Adam Booth for a while. So there's a lot of knowledge over there. I think it's a good decision. And the timeline has worked too, because Parker boxed at the end of February, Paddy Donovan boxed basically a week later. And since then, they've been kind of uninterrupted. But I'm looking forward to it because it's a good venue, the one we're going to in Birmingham. It's sold well, and I think it's going to be fairly raucous in there.
Absolutely. Well, I got a little game I want to play with you real quickly. It's going to be 10 questions I'm going to ask you, going through some random questions all regarding boxing. I'll probably do some follow-ups on some of these depending on the answers. But let's get right to it now. So it's going to be 10 questions with Andy Clarke. Very first one. Who is the best fighter that you've ever covered?
The best fight?
Best fighter.
Oh, fighter.
Oh, sorry, you're right. Yes, the best fight you've ever covered. Sorry, yeah, I've read the second question. My bad.
Oh, the best fight. So the best fight, it might not have been technically the best fight, but Fury Wilder 3, I was there covering that for a radio station actually in the UK. It wasn't a Sky fight, but yeah, it was just absolute madness from beginning to end.
The best British boxer of all time.
Best British boxer of all time. I think it's probably either Lennox Lewis or John Conte. I'm more familiar with Lewis. So in my kind of viewing lifetime, I would probably go with Lewis.
The current best British fighter.
The current best British fighter. We don't have too many world champions on our hands at the minute. I think the one we've got at the minute who is probably going to go on and do the best, although he hasn't done it yet, is Itauma, probably Moses Itauma.
Okay, definitely. The best boxing atmosphere you've ever been to?
Luckily for me, that's quite a difficult question to answer because the crowds in the UK are pretty insane. I would say AJ Klitschko at Wembley, because of the sheer drama of the fight, that was pretty remarkable. But so was Madison Square Garden for Joshua against Ruiz, because that wasn't supposed to happen. And when Joshua was getting knocked down and everybody's on their feet in a really famous old place, it's one of those two, I think.
Okay. Your favorite boxer to watch?
Usyk, I think.
The best decade/era of British boxing?
I think you're always going to be coloured slightly here by how old you are and when you grew up and the era you grew up in. But for me, it would be the 90s, because the 90s started with Ben Eubank, and then we have Ben Eubank again, and then Steve Collins turned up, and then you've got Nassim arriving in that decade as well. For me, it would be the 90s. I'm just kind of a massive fan of the 90s because I was a teenager in the 90s, but heavyweight boxing internationally in the 90s was just this absolute madness as well, which, I think so much went on in that decade in boxing. A lot of it completely ridiculous, but there were some really good fighters as well.
So who's the best British prospect?
Best British prospect. I'll go for someone who you probably won't know, actually. He turned pro off the back of winning a couple of national titles, but he turned pro at about 20. And I'd seen him win these couple of national titles, but didn't go for the Olympics or anything like that. It's a kid from from Birmingham who boxes at the lower weights. He's around kind of flyweight bantamweight. It's called Hamza Uddin.
Okay.
There's a bit of a Nassim Hamed about him. He's talented, good to watch. So, and he's under the radar at the minute too. People won't really have heard much about him, but have a look at him. He's going to be fun.
All right. What do you love most about boxing?
I think it's the sheer unpredictability of it, because you just don't know what's going to happen, and all sorts of things can happen in that ring. The rules are pretty simple, but every year, every season, something happens where I think, okay, I wasn't expecting that. I've never really seen that. Whittaker Cameron, for example, you see things like it, but on a fight you're actually working on, you think, God, there's a situation you've got to deal with. And it is really the most unpredictable thing of all is the knockout, and that's why I got so obsessed about it and wrote a book about it, really, because you don't have that in other sports, this capacity to completely flip something on its head and finish the contest in the blink of an eye. You just can't do it in other sports. You can score late, you can get a basket on the buzzer, a last minute goal in football, but you've got to be right there, and it's got to be really close for you to be able to do that. You have to be within striking distance, where in boxing, you can be 8-9 rounds down, and then all of a sudden it's over. And it's just that moment of pure drama where you've got this kind of living, breathing organism in front of you that's just so full of life and possibilities, a fight. And then all of a sudden it's finished. It's just bizarre. Every time I see one, I just can't. It is a mind-blowing thing.
If you were going to go fight next and you had to get a trainer to go help yourself get ready for a fight, who would you pick as that trainer?
I would probably, this isn't really a proper answer, but I would probably go with my Sky Sports co-commentator, Matt Macklin, because he's a very knowledgeable guy, but also he knows me.
Sure.
And he would probably manage to find a way for me to exit the ring without getting killed or without making a massive fool of myself.
Awesome. Well, the 10th question then, the next British fighter to become a world champion is?
That's an interesting one, that, I mean, the cupboard is a little bit bare at the moment. I'm just thinking about the weights and who's within striking distance and who's got a shot, or who has realistically got a shot coming up fairly soon. Galal Yafai, I would say, is pretty likely. The kind of more romantic answer would be Itauma, but how do you go about getting an opportunity when all of the belts are owned by two people? It's that. I mean, that's been the case since. God, that's been the case forever almost. I think since Joshua won that WBO in end of March 2018. I think ever since then, all four belts have been shared by two people. The identities have changed, obviously, but I think that's the situation we've had. So it's been hard to get opportunities. So yeah, I'll probably say probably FI.
Absolutely. Well, I do want to pivot off one of those things. And actually, one of the questions I want to follow up on was you brought up Itauma. He's the guy that everyone's looking at, especially I'm sure British fans are a lot more excited than obviously we are over here. But I've seen him a lot. I'm a huge fan of him. When you just look at what he's capable of at the age he's currently at, which a lot of guys at his age are not able to fight at a high level at the heavyweight division. Obviously, he hasn't had big fights yet per se, but I think it's obviously coming in the future. How bright do you think his future is?
It's incredibly bright because everybody you speak to says the same thing about him. I was commentating with Shane McGuigan on Usyk Fury and Matt before Christmas, and he'd had him in the gym. The famous story about him turning up for sparring in his school uniform, and they had to wait until 4:00 to do sparring because he was literally finishing school. That was at Shane's gym, and he was sparring Lawrence Okoli and gave him all sorts of problems. I spoke to Lawrence about it, and he said, yeah, it was absolutely. I mean, it was embarrassing. It was painful. It was all of the things you don't want. And I said to him, would you fight him at some point in the future? And he actually just laughed and said no. And he was happy to. He was happy to do it. He didn't feel any kind of shame. It's really unusual to get that kind of reaction from an active fighter. And you ask anybody, and they, like I said, they all say the same thing. I don't think there's any real chance of him getting ahead of himself. He seems very switched on. He's got a very good heavyweight crew around him in the Warrens. They know how to do it. And last time we saw him against Dempsey McKean was really supposed to ask some questions. He's a big man who'd only lost one fight against Hrgovic, I think it was, a fight that he'd done well in, and he just poleaxed him in absolutely no time. And he did it right in front of us as well. He was on our side of the ring. And you see the setup and the movement and the speed. Yeah. And you just think, wow, God, this guy's going to be a huge, huge problem. So I'm fascinated to see what they do with him next, to be honest, because who's going to want to fight him? If you're in and around him in the rankings, there's not much in it for you. You're never going to say, oh, no, I don't, you price yourself out is what you do. Mm-hmm. But he's made a lot of progress, so pretty soon he's going to get mandated and things like that. But he'll always have to be. It's going to have to be that way because you're not going to fight him unless you have to. No one's giving him a voluntary. I mean, that would just be an absurd thing to do.
Yeah. And so you look at him, I know there's also a big British guy, really young still, and he's a world champion right now, Daniel Dubois. And I know, obviously, we said it's probably a little bit of ways away until he gets that world championship fight, whether it be a year plus or whatever. Is that a fight you see being competitive and being a big fight to have happen one day in the future?
Oh, I do, because I think Dubois is in that place where he is bursting full of confidence. I would have loved to have seen that fight against Parker because Dubois was installed as quite a heavy favourite by most people. And I understood it, but at the same time, I think Parker has looked better and better and better in every fight he's had recently. And he's experienced and he's clever and he knows his way around the ring. And you look at Bacoli. When Bacoli came in, everybody was talking about, well, it's a bit of a risk and all of that. And they were happy to take it. And then he put him away. And I do think that would have been a really interesting fight. I made that pretty much a 50-50 fight, to be honest. And I'm still really keen to see it. But Dubois, you talk about someone growing when they win a title. And he'd been elevated to champion before he beat Joshua. But the win against Joshua was his world title win, really. I know that's kind of how he looks at it. And now he's just walking taller. He seems more comfortable in his own skin. It's amazing to see, really, when somebody just takes that step, particularly given what's happened to him previously, earlier in his career. He just, the vibe you get off him now, the kind of aura you get off him now is one of just complete and utter resolution and confidence. So he is going to take some beating. You've got to be a clever fighter to beat him, but Itauma is definitely a clever fighter. We will see that, but they do need to kind of build that because at the minute, Itauma he's had a lot of press, but he's not a big name fighter. The fights that he's had have been in Saudi, so they've been on Sky and TNT and DAZN, which helps him because the way the market share is in the UK, basically Sky's been around that long that they dominate really. So if you want to get out to a big audience, that's where you kind of need to be. But he's on DAZN because he signed with Queensberry, but he's always going to be on there. They will get him out to the biggest audience they can, however they need to do it, because they need to make him kind of more of a star, really. Because Dubois AJ, for example, at Wembley, it sold okay on pay-per-view here, but not as well as you might have thought, basically because nobody thought that Dubois could beat Joshua. Yeah. I mean, the bigger casual audience that you need to suck in to really do numbers, because they didn't really know who he was, they just assumed that he couldn't win. Yeah. And that's always what you're up against, isn't it? It's the same everywhere, isn't it? If you get an overseas fighter come to fight a home fighter, you look at the bookmakers' odds and it's like they've never even bothered to look at the away fighter. It's just, well, we don't know who he is, so he's going to lose. He's going to lose, basically. And all of that stuff can take some time.
Absolutely. Well, Andy, I appreciate you taking time to come on today. It was a blessing having you on today.
No, it's been fun. It's been really fun. Thanks.
Absolutely. You're always welcome on. God bless.